Hi, I'm Venitra. My parents didn't come to my wedding. They said it was too small, not worth the trip. But then the photos went viral, and suddenly, everyone had something to say. Worse than their absence was what came after, when they tried to pretend they had always been part of it, when they used my silence to rewrite the story in their favor. Have you ever watched your own family pretend you didn't exist, just because it made their version of the truth more convenient? That's what happened to me, and it only got worse from there. Want to know how far they went? Let me show you. It was just past 11. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast from dinner, and the only sound in the apartment was the low hum of the fridge. I had been scrolling through my phone absent-mindedly, clearing notifications, when I saw it. My mother's name lit up the screen. Just one text. Sorry, Venitra. We're not coming. It's too far for something so small. No punctuation, no warmth, not even a follow-up. At first I blinked, convinced I misread it. Then I read it again. A third time. My thumb hovered over the screen, expecting more. There wasn't more. That was it. No call, no love you. Just the dismissal, cold and final. I sat frozen at the kitchen counter, phone clutched in my hand. My heart didn't race. My chest didn't rise and fall with panic. Instead, it sank, quiet and heavy, like a stone dropped into deep water. And that silence, my mother's silence, was louder than any shouting could have been. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. The next morning came slowly. I went through the motions, showered, dressed, even replied to some work emails. But my brain hadn't moved. It was still sitting there, in that text, still waiting for an apology that wasn't coming. By mid-morning, I stepped out onto our small balcony, mug in hand, not for the coffee, but for something to do. Alaric came out quietly behind me. I must have looked a mess, though he didn't say so. He never did. He sat beside me. Waited. Then, finally, what happened? I turned the phone screen toward him. Didn't say a word. He read the message, his eyes narrowing as he passed the phone back to me. They're not coming, I said. My voice felt borrowed, as if someone else were speaking through me. I know, he murmured, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. And I hate that it still shocks you. I nodded, because it was true. They'd let me down before, quietly, consistently, but this time felt different. Not because it hurt more, but because I wasn't willing to explain it away anymore. I thought I was ready for this. I thought I had detached. But when people you love make a choice to exclude you, not accidentally, not unknowingly, but willfully, it cuts through the numbness like glass. 2 days passed. I didn't tell anyone. I went to fittings, finalized flower orders, adjusted seating charts. Then Rachel, my best friend since college, texted, "You see this?" with a link. My stomach dropped before I even clicked. I knew. It was Lorraine, my older sister, posting her birthday dinner on Facebook. Balloons, streamers, a cake with Happy 42nd, written in looping white frosting. All of them were there. Our brothers, their wives, even cousins I hadn't seen in years. Holding glasses, laughing. Caption: So lucky to have this family. Birthday love. And the date? The exact day of my wedding. I stared at the photos. Each smiling face was like a nail hammered into my gut. No one even tried to hide it. No one mentioned me. My name didn't come up in the comments. Not a single person said, "Wish we could have celebrated with Venitra too." I whispered out loud, "They didn't skip it because it was small. They skipped it because it was mine." Alaric didn't need to say anything when I showed him. His jaw clenched and he shook his head. But he didn't speak. He knew I wasn't looking for sympathy. I was cataloging reality, quietly collecting what I could no longer deny. That night, I sat at my laptop and opened the family group chat. I hovered over the icon, then pressed Leave Group. One click. Years of silent tolerance undone. Later, at my gown fitting, I stood in front of the mirror while Rachel fussed with the cathedral-length veil. The dress hugged me in all the right places. Silk, tailored precisely to my frame, with hand-sewn beading along the sleeves. I should have felt radiant. Rachel stepped back and smiled at me in the mirror. They're going to regret missing this. I met her eyes through the reflection and said, let them. No tears, no trembling lip, just decision. Because regret belongs to the people who chose absence, not to the ones they left behind. Rachel and I left the fitting just before noon, grabbed sandwiches from that old cafe on Fremont, same one we used to haunt in college, and found a table near the window. Monterey had that moody fog that day, the kind that blurred traffic lights and made everything feel a little more distant, a little less urgent. We sat in silence for a bit, unwrapping our food. I was mid-bite when Rachel looked up from her phone and said, "You might want to see this." She slid the phone across the table. It was a Facebook post from Darby, Lorraine's husband. The caption read, "Some weddings are for families. Some are just for the gram." No names, no tags, just public enough to sting, subtle enough to be defended as just a thought. I stared at the screen while she kept talking, something about how tone-deaf he'd always been, how he thought sarcasm passed for wit. I didn't really hear her. I wasn't even angry yet, just stilled. The reactions were already rolling in. Laughing emojis, heart reacts from cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years. People I'd invited, who'd never even RSVP'd. "That's who I am to them," I said finally, folding the napkin on my lap over the untouched half of my sandwich. A punchline. Rachel didn't argue. She just said, "You don't deserve this." The way people say it when they know it won't fix anything. I smiled, but it didn't reach anywhere near my eyes. That weekend, I kept a prior commitment, one I probably should have canceled, but didn't. A family brunch at Lorraine's house, set months ago, before any of this had unraveled. It was supposed to be simple, just food, a chance to breathe through the tension. Instead, it was a performance. Lorraine's husband greeted me like nothing had happened, as if I hadn't read his snide commentary plastered online. He handed me a mimosa like I hadn't been mocked for planning a small wedding, like I hadn't become their favorite target. I nodded, accepted the drink, and took a single sip before setting it down untouched. After plates had been cleared and the polite noise started fading, I pulled my mother aside in the kitchen. She was rinsing glasses, facing the window. I waited for her to acknowledge me. She didn't. "Mom," I started, voice low, "is it really that small? Is that the reason you're not coming?" She turned just slightly, gave a soft laugh. "Don't make this bigger than it is," she said. "You're getting married, not going to war." I felt my jaw clench. "That's not what I—" "You always overthink things, honey," she cut in, drying her hands now, smiling without warmth. "This isn't a personal attack. It's just not a convenient time." Right. Not convenient. Not when the whole family had rearranged their lives to make it to Lorraine's third vow renewal in the backyard, complete with matching t-shirts and catered shrimp. I didn't press further. What was the point? She had already made her choice, just like all the others. "I'm gonna head out," I said, pulling my coat from the back of a chair. As I walked past Darby, he raised his glass with a smirk. "You know where to find us if you change your mind about that courthouse thing." I didn't respond. I wouldn't have been able to speak even if I wanted to. Back home, Alaric was finishing some emails when I came in. He looked up. "How'd it go?" I towed off my shoes by the door and hung my coat. "They think I'm exaggerating," I said, crossing the room slowly. "Always have. Always will." He didn't say anything right away. Just stood up, crossed over, and pulled me into his arms. I let him. That night, after he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my wedding binder in front of me. The pages were clean, organized, covered in plans and guest lists and color codes I'd made with too much hope. I opened to the page marked Family and stared at the list. Mom, Lorraine, Darby, my brothers, their wives, cousins. One by one, I crossed them out. No ceremony invite, no reception details, no explanation. I kept Alaric's side, my college roommates, my mentor from the hospital. I even added Rachel's daughter, just turning 12, because she'd insisted on wearing a flower girl dress, even though we weren't doing flowers. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity. If being part of their picture meant shrinking myself to fit inside their frame, I'd rather step out of it entirely. Sometimes dignity means choosing solitude over conditional love, and yet, I still hoped one of them might change their mind. That hope would cost me. I didn't expect clarity to feel so quiet. No thunder, no sense of justice, just space. An open, uncomfortable space where certainty had taken root, yet a small, tired part of me still wished someone would fill it with change. That wish unraveled on a Tuesday. It started with a voicemail. Not from my mother. She'd made herself scarce since the brunch. But from my uncle's wife. She'd called to check in, and, somewhere between forced laughter and gossip about her neighbor's messy divorce, dropped a line she thought sounded supportive. "I mean, we all have to make sacrifices, right? You just love bigger than most, sweetie." I didn't know what she meant at first. Then it hit me. She was referring to that time, 2 years back, when Mom landed in the hospital with a heart scare. I'd wired money the same day, $7,000, quietly, no questions asked, no repayment expected. I never told anyone but Alaric. I brought it up once, offhand, at dinner, thinking it might be safe. My mom shrugged and smiled at my aunt and said, "We took care of it ourselves. That's what real family does. We don't make people feel indebted." That rewrote the truth so thoroughly, I felt erased in real time. They never thanked me, but they made sure to edit me out of the memory. It wasn't the money, it was the erasure. That moment, the way her voice held pride instead of shame, stayed lodged in the space behind my ribs for months. Like I'd paid for the right to be forgotten. Funny thing is, I kept doing it, playing the giver, showing up, paying the bill, keeping quiet. Then came the honeymoon. Alaric and I had booked Santorini. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. I'd always dreamed of walking cliffside paths in a sundress, watching the Aegean shift color by hour. But when Mom collapsed again just 2 weeks before the trip, I canceled everything, called the airline, lost the money, put our bags back in storage. Alaric didn't say a word, just held me that night and rubbed slow circles into my back. She recovered within days. Took a cruise later that summer. I didn't bring it up. Then Lorraine went on her honeymoon 3 months later. Her second one, by the way, because apparently vow renewals now come with oceanfront suites. Mom commented on every post like she'd sponsored the whole thing. On one, she wrote, "Now that's how you do a family trip." I stared at that comment for a long time. It sat there like a lit match on a memory soaked in gasoline. I didn't reply. I didn't even screenshot it. I just felt something shift. Maybe some debts aren't called in with expectation, but that doesn't mean they aren't owed. They just hope you forget the balance. That evening, back at home, the house was still. Alaric was out running errands, and I sat at the dining table folding wedding programs. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, soft to the touch. Every crease felt like meditation. He walked in as I finished the last one, placed his keys in the dish, kissed the top of my head, and sat beside me. He picked up one of the folded programs, ran his fingers along the edge. "They're beautiful," he said. I didn't look up. "Thanks. You okay?" I paused. "You remember that hospital bill I covered for Mom?" "Yeah." "They don't." He said nothing. Just looked at me the way people do when they wish they could rewrite your past. I exhaled slowly, stacking the finished cards. "You've been showing up for people who'd leave you at the curb," he said. I nodded. I know, but I had to be sure that I wasn't the problem. Silence settled between us. Not awkward, just real. This wasn't bitterness. It was recognition. I didn't need to be liked. I needed the truth. And the truth was, I'd been building a bridge no one else was walking toward. So I stopped. I didn't set it on fire. I just stopped reinforcing it. But even honesty can't protect you from what comes next, especially when the lies go silent too. That night, after we finished folding the last of the ceremony programs, Alaric headed to bed early. I lingered in the kitchen a little longer, letting the quiet soak in, watching shadows stretch across the tile like they were trying to hold on to something already gone. I poured myself a glass of water, took a few sips, and opened my laptop to double-check the playlist for the ceremony. Nothing big, just making sure the string quartet had the right order. Halfway through previewing one of the cello pieces, Alaric walked back in. He didn't say anything at first, just handed me his phone. "You need to see this." His voice wasn't angry, but it was changed. Like whatever it was, it mattered more than usual. I took the phone. My heart didn't race. I didn't feel dread. I'd stopped expecting the best from them weeks ago. It was a screenshot of a group chat, one I wasn't in, one I had never been in. The name of the thread? Let's just ignore it. There they were, my brothers, Lorraine, and my mother, talking like I was a national inconvenience. Someone had written, "She's being a drama queen, as usual." Another chimed in, "She'll probably live stream it just so someone watches." And from my own mother, "Just nod, smile, and let her spin her little fantasy. She'll crash out of it eventually." I didn't say a word. My finger didn't move. My face didn't shift. But inside, something stilled, so deeply that I felt the difference in my breath. It wasn't heartbreak. I didn't have any illusions left for them to shatter. It was something colder, like standing in a room you used to call home and realizing it never remembered your name. I handed Alaric his phone without looking at him, walked into the living room, sat down. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my laptop again, logged into the shared wedding folder I'd sent them weeks ago, the one with our ceremony plans, vendor contacts, even the guest registry for their convenience. One by one, I revoked every permission. Gone. Then I opened a blank document, titled it Vows, New Draft, and started fresh. No flowery metaphors. No poetic promises to hold space for people who don't know what presence means. Just truth. Clean and sharp. I won't keep setting a table for people who bring hunger, not presence. That line stayed. Everything else changed. It was the first time my vows weren't written with hope in mind. They were written with clarity, with reality, with the unshakable understanding that love and obligation do not mean the same thing, and never have. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The next morning, I got up early. The air was crisp, and the fog hadn't burned off yet. I made coffee, sat at the table, and drafted one last message. This one to Lorraine. Short, unpolished. No dramatic punctuation. I've seen the messages. If this continues, I'll remove all of you. Not from the wedding, from my life. It was the kind of message you send not to threaten, but to clarify. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, just after noon, my phone lit up. From Lorraine. "You're being sensitive again. You always make everything about you." I didn't bother responding. I blocked her number. Not in rage, not in revenge, but in defense. Because I used to think cutting people off was cruel. That saying enough made you cold or selfish or petty. But staying in a space where you're picked apart behind your back and placated to your face, that's not loyalty. That's erasure on a delay. They weren't angry that I'd spoken up. They were angry that I'd stopped shrinking. They had labeled me dramatic, not because I was loud, but because I was no longer silent. Not the golden child, not the fixer, not the invisible middle. Just a woman asking to be treated like her presence mattered, and punished for the audacity of it. I didn't slam the metaphorical door shut. I just turned the lock. But even when you shut the door, some people will still try to break your windows. The next few days passed without incident, at least on the surface. I went through my checklist for the wedding, final fittings, a call with the caterer, table placements, but under that, a thrum of something colder had settled. It was no longer sadness, or even anger. It was precision. A sense that I had entered a part of the story where things no longer got fixed. They just got named. Late Thursday morning, I was standing at the kitchen counter, cutting fresh lemon slices for tea, when my phone lit up. It was my mother. The call didn't surprise me. The timing did. She always avoided real conversation before noon, claiming mornings were for peace, not people. I let it ring once before answering. "Hello?" Her voice was chipper, practiced. "I saw a photo online. Looked like you're really pulling out the stops." I didn't respond. I waited. "You know," she continued, tone tightening just slightly, "if you had told us it was going to be a real wedding, we might have tried harder." There it was. The implication that effort was conditional, that I was somehow responsible for their absence, because I didn't sell it well enough. I set the knife down slowly, wiped my hands on a towel. "A real wedding doesn't need a ballroom to be real," I said. "It just needs people who want to be there." Silence. I heard her inhale, long and controlled. Then she said, "There it is. That tone of yours always has to make everything a statement." And then she hung up. I didn't call back. I didn't pace the kitchen. I didn't text Rachel. I just finished making my tea and took it to the window. There was something satisfying about hearing the line go dead and feeling nothing. No rage, no disbelief, just confirmation. That evening, after Alaric returned from a grocery run and settled into the living room with his laptop, I opened my email to review a few messages from the efficient. As I scrolled, I saw an automated alert from the cloud folder I'd set up. One file removed, wedding speech, Venitra final.move. At first, I thought it was a glitch. I opened the folder. The video I had recorded, my private vows, intended for family who couldn't attend, something I had poured heart into one quiet afternoon, was gone. I checked the edit history. It had been manually deleted from my mother's account. I texted her, "Did you mean to remove my video?" The response came back quickly. "It didn't seem necessary anymore. Not sure why you shared it in the first place." I stared at the message for a long time. That file had taken me 3 hours to record. I'd spoken every word like I was holding a mirror to my younger self, promising her she wasn't foolish for wanting love, for wanting to believe people would show up if you gave them enough time, enough proof of your worth. And now it was gone, with one click. Not because it was offensive, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was mine, because it dared to make them feel something they couldn't control. I closed the laptop, then reopened it. One by one, I deleted every shared file. The folder, the links, the guest list copy, the photo album, gone. They had decided I wasn't worth watching, so I made sure they couldn't watch anymore. After dinner, I restored the old family group chat, not to reconnect, but to send one final message. "You've made it clear I'm the embarrassment. If one more piece of my life gets tampered with, I'll stop protecting your version of the truth." No insults, no dramatic send-off, just truth laid flat, like cards on a table. They read it. I saw the check marks, but no one replied. Alaric walked into the room while I was still sitting at the desk. He leaned against the doorframe and raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" I didn't look up. "No," I said, "but I'm ready." And I meant it. Not the kind of readiness you say to avoid conflict. The kind that shows up when silence no longer works as a peace offering. They wanted me to act like I was unbothered, like none of it mattered. But you can only be quiet for so long before your silence becomes a soundtrack to your own erasure. They thought I was loud when I finally said something, but I didn't need to scream. The silence was already loud enough to break glass. The next morning came with a strange stillness. Not peace exactly, more like the quiet that settles just after a storm when everything's been knocked over, but nothing's been cleaned up. I made myself a soft-boiled egg, left the coffee to steep a little longer than usual, and sat down at the table with the envelope that had arrived the day before. Inside was the wedding album. It wasn't a surprise. I'd paid extra for rush shipping, but holding it in my hands, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Not anger, not grief. Power. Not the dramatic kind, not revenge. Just the calm, clear kind of power that comes when you've stopped waiting for someone else to explain you. I flipped through the photos, stopping at one taken during the ceremony. The ocean wide and endless behind us, flower petals curling at the corners of the altar. Another. The dinner table glowing with candles, every plate set with intentional care. Then one of me and Alaric on the dance floor, his hand on the small of my back, my dress caught mid-spin like it was floating on its own. No one in those pictures needed to be convinced of anything. By the time I finished my second cup of coffee, I had chosen the 3 images I would post. No long caption, no tag, no anger. Just this. 1 month ago today, I married the love of my life. Small, intentional, perfect. I hit share. By lunch, comments poured in. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years were chiming in. People I worked with years ago in pediatrics, old classmates, even 2 of Alaric's cousins who'd flown in and still texted us wedding jokes every week. But more telling than the flood of kind words was the silence from my family. No likes, no comments. No looks beautiful, or even a passive-aggressive heart emoji. They'd gone quiet. That night, while Alaric was rinsing dishes and humming something off-key, I got a notification. Lorraine had posted a carousel of photos to her Instagram. Caption, "Proud big sister vibes." The first photo was from her birthday. The second was my wedding. A picture of the ocean backdrop. Another of my shoes, my actual wedding shoes, laid across the carpet with her tag. "Her style is always so classic." The comment section exploded. "Gorgeous setup! Your sister really knows how to throw a wedding. You always support each other so beautifully." She hadn't been there. She had declined the invitation, told me it was too small to be worth the drive, told everyone else she had a conflict, and now she was collecting compliments for something she never showed up for. I stared at her post for a long time, then sent a message, short and sharp. "You weren't there? Don't pretend you were." She didn't respond. 3 hours later, I checked again. The post was still up, but the caption had changed. Now it was just a single heart emoji. Nothing more. No explanation. No apology. They never own it. They just edit around the truth. The next morning, while I was writing thank you notes, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from my cousin Carly. "Girl, why didn't you tell us it was like that? I would have come." I read it 3 times before typing a reply. I deleted my first version, my second. On the third, I finally hit send. "If a view made it worth showing up, then you never really wanted to be there." She never answered. That afternoon, I created a private photo album, just for the people who came. No public posts, no curated facade, just a quiet thank you to the 30 people who had chosen presence over performance. I attached a note. "Thank you for being part of something real. No edits, no facades." Before sending, I looked over at Alaric, who was reading on the couch. He looked up, gave me a soft smile, and said, "You sure?" I clicked send. "If they want the memory," I said, "they'll have to live with what they missed." I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because it was the truth. For once, the story was mine, and I had chosen to tell it with pictures they couldn't edit. I thought the silence after those pictures would be enough. I was wrong. 2 days after I posted the wedding photos, things went quiet. Unusually quiet, even for them. No snide comments, no vague posts, no text from my mother asking why I felt the need to make things public. For a second, I wondered if they'd finally understood. That illusion didn't last long. A week later, Rachel called while I was unloading groceries. Her voice had that tone, tight and low, like she was trying to ask gently, but didn't know how. "Have you seen Lorraine's post?" I hadn't. She sent the link, and I opened it while leaning against the counter, still holding a bag of oranges. A full spread of photos filled the screen. "Family dinner last night," the caption read. Another line below, in bold, family is who shows up, period. Every person in my immediate family was there. My brothers, their wives, cousins, even Aunt Lenora, who lived 3 states away and once claimed her sciatica made travel impossible. They were smiling, toasting, and seated at a table set for celebration. And right where I used to sit, same end of the table, same angle in the photo, was Jolene. The same Jolene who once called my wardrobe funeral core during a Thanksgiving lunch. And now there she was, in my spot, wearing a dress that looked suspiciously similar in cut to mine. They hadn't just gathered. They had staged something, a replacement, a message, loud, public, sharp-edged and dressed in matching champagne tones. That afternoon, I went for a long walk. Not to clear my head was clearer than it had been in months, but to avoid typing something I couldn't take back. I didn't respond, not yet. But I noted the move, the angle, the caption. They hadn't spoken to me, but they were absolutely talking about me. That evening, as Alaric and I sat down to dinner, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen and saw a message request from Jolene. I showed it to Alaric, who raised one eyebrow before going back to slicing into his steak. The message read, "OMG, what designer did your dress? I'm obsessed. I want to copy it for my photo shoot next month." I stared at the screen. This same cousin, who once laughed at me for wearing black to a bridal shower, who said my style made me look like I work at a cemetery, now wanted to wear a replica of the dress I designed and paid for. Without support, without applause. I typed back, "Custom, not for copy." Then I blocked her. No dramatics, no final statement, just a closed door. It still amazes me how quickly some people will dismiss you in private, only to mimic you in public when it benefits their image. They don't want to be you. They just want what being you earns. 2 days later, another email landed in my inbox. It had been forwarded to me by a distant cousin I'd stayed in touch with since college. The subject line read, "Hope to see you there." It was an invite to a family reconciliation dinner, an event I had clearly not been told about. Below the flyer was a note from my mother. "Not sure if this will be your thing. Didn't want to assume." I checked the invite list. My name wasn't on it. My photo wasn't anywhere near it. But Lorraine's was, centered, smiling, holding a glass of wine. A dinner to reconnect, featuring people who never showed up for my wedding, but suddenly found the time to plan an event built on my absence. I sat with it, read it 3 times. Then I stood, walked into the living room, and handed the phone to Alaric. "They're rewriting it," I said. "Rewriting what?" he asked. "Me." I paused, let it settle. "They've started crafting the version of me they can live with. The one who was always too emotional, too difficult, too much. The one who ruined things by speaking up. The one who wasn't really excluded, just didn't fit." Alaric didn't interrupt. He never does when I'm drawing the line. "So what now?" he asked. I looked at him, then down at the glass in my hand. "Now? They don't get to write me out," I said. "I take the pen back." This time, not with a post or a photo, not with a dramatic call-out, but with the kind of clarity they couldn't delete. If they were ready to erase me, they should have checked who owned the camera. The next morning, I woke early, before the light had started to stretch through the blinds. The house was still, the kind of quiet that carries weight instead of peace. Alaric was still asleep, breathing deep, one arm flung over to my side of the bed. I eased out gently, pulled on a sweater, and walked to the kitchen. There was a small box waiting on the counter. I had picked it up from the post office the day before, addressed in thick black ink with no return label. Something about it felt final, intentional. I poured myself coffee, opened the lid carefully. Inside was a leather folder, simple, clean. I flipped it open. 3 printed photographs lay on top. My wedding, of course. The ocean behind the altar. The dinner table glowing in soft candlelight, and one of me and Alaric mid-dance, his eyes locked on mine like we'd rewritten gravity. Beneath them, the original invitation, still sealed. At the bottom, a handwritten note in my own script. In case one day you say I never asked. Across town, in her kitchen, I could imagine my mother holding those same photos, staring down at them longer than she'd ever stared at me. I pictured her fingers trembling, just a little, as she realized the story she had told herself no longer held. I used to beg them to see me. Now, I just make sure they can't pretend they didn't. 2 days earlier, I had stood at the counter of the same post office where I'd mailed holiday cards for years. No drama, no ceremony, just a box sent across town with a message no one could twist. It wasn't to wound them. It was to end the pretending. That night, I was folding laundry when I got the message. It was from Celestine, my sister-in-law. She had mostly stayed on the sidelines through all this, never chosen a side, never added to the fire, never tried to put it out. Her message was short. I thought you should have this. Do what you want with it. Attached was a video, 42 seconds long. The setting, Lorraine's kitchen. The timing, 2 weeks before my wedding. Voices clear as day. My mother, first. It's just for the look. You know how she is. Always has to make everything dramatic. Then Lorraine's voice, smooth and cold. If we show up, we validate it. Let her have her fairy tale, without us. I watched the clip twice, then saved it. I didn't forward it, didn't send it to a cousin with a caption, didn't upload it to the private album. I just gave it a name. Proof not needed. Still kept.mp4. Sometimes you don't share the truth for applause. Sometimes you keep it to remember you weren't imagining it. The next few days were silent. No one texted, no one called. The family thread that had once lit up with vacation photos and passive-aggressive holiday plans was still and blank. Until a card arrived. No envelope, just a glossy photograph tucked inside a blank page. It was a photo of Lorraine and me, years ago. We were maybe 8 or 9, sitting on the back porch steps in matching overalls, eating popsicles. The photo had been folded once, down the middle, right between us. No note, no explanation, just that. I held it for a moment, then folded it again, twice this time, and dropped it in the trash. That picture captured a moment that didn't exist anymore. Maybe it never had. They had one chance to show up and chose absence. I chose presence, and now I choose distance. Not to punish them, but to protect myself. Because even when they say nothing, silence can still echo with everything they don't have the courage to admit. They didn't show up for the wedding, but they're all in the story now, whether they like it or not. The weekend after the silence, I took a long walk through the neighborhood. Monterey had just started to shift into that crisp fall edge. Clearer skies, softer wind. The kind of quiet that didn't demand anything from you. I passed the bakery where Alaric and I ordered our wedding cake, the park where we first decided to have the ceremony outdoors. Everything felt settled. When I got home, there was a small box on the porch. No return label. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and washed my hands before opening it. There was no urgency. I already knew what it was. Inside, bundled in a yellowing grocery bag, was a stack of old mail. On top, my wedding invitation, addressed to my mother in my handwriting. Still sealed. I turned it over in my hands. The edges were soft from time, but the wax seal hadn't been touched. I set it down and stared at it for a long while. Not because I was expecting anything to spill out of it, but because I realized the envelope had never been the point. The unopened seal wasn't the wound. It was the truth. It had never mattered what was inside. No one ever cared enough to find out. I didn't cry. I didn't rip it open in some act of drama or closure. I placed it back in the box and slid it onto the top shelf of the linen closet, where we keep old birthday cards, faded recipes from my grandmother, and things that mattered once. Not to hold a grudge, but to remember how far I've come. 2 days later, while having my morning coffee, my phone buzzed with a notification. Lorraine had deleted her wedding carousel. No message, no context, just gone. The only comment left was from someone I didn't recognize. "Why'd you delete the best post you ever made?" Lorraine never replied. I didn't feel vindicated, but I felt clear. They can remove the pictures. They can archive the captions, but they don't get to sweep away what was done. I turned to Alaric, who was scrolling the news beside me. "Looks like she deleted it," I said. He didn't look up. "Too late to unsay what you've already lived." I nodded, took another sip of coffee. "Let them clean up the mess they made," I said, "but they don't get to clean me out with it." That evening, we hosted a quiet dinner. Just the two of us, Rachel, her daughter, and a few close friends. Nothing fancy. Takeout from the Thai place down the street, candles on the patio table, a soft playlist running in the background. It was our first anniversary. No speeches, no photos, just real conversation and shared food. Midway through dinner, Rachel raised her glass. To showing up, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's not loud. Everyone lifted theirs in unison. I stood up slowly, looked around at the people who hadn't made excuses, who hadn't needed spectacle to understand the value of presence. To knowing, I said, that absence is also a choice, and sometimes it's louder than presence. We toasted, and the moment passed like it was supposed to, quietly, fully. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I packed away a few leftover spring rolls and poured a glass of wine. Then I walked into the hallway closet and pulled down the memory box. Inside, the unopened invitation. I placed it gently next to a printed photo of the dance floor from our wedding, the one where Alaric was spinning me with that look on his face that said, "You are here. You are not invisible." I didn't get closure in the way people talk about it. No apology. No tearful phone call. No sudden awareness from the ones who stayed absent. I gave it to myself. They taught me how to live with absence. I taught myself how to live without apology. You know, if there's one thing life keeps trying to teach me, it's this. You can't make people show up for you just because you would have shown up for them. And sometimes, the hardest thing you'll ever do is stop trying. But walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Setting boundaries isn't punishment, it's protection. And learning to celebrate yourself, even when the people you love choose absence. That's not selfishness. That's survival. That's peace. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you've felt invisible in your own family, or silenced for wanting something more honest, more kind. If this story touched a piece of your own, your childhood, your marriage, your silence, I want you to know you are not alone, and you are not wrong for needing more. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had to let go of someone just to hold on to yourself? Or stayed quiet for so long, people mistook it for agreement? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below, share where you're watching from, or simply type 1 if this hit home for you. And if it didn't, that's okay too. Let me know why. Your voice matters here. And if you want more stories that speak to the quiet battles behind closed doors, the ones that never make the headlines but shape us all the same, then stick around. Subscribe to the channel, not just for the next video, but for the moments where your story finally feels seen